Oh, hello there. Welcome to another episode of The Problem with Everything. This is episode number... What's the number that comes after 4? Is that 5? Is that also called go in some language? Perhaps, I'm not sure. I can't really remember my Japanese. Unless I count from 1 to 10. The episode we're currently within is about knowledge. And I think that I ought to address it as a problem, because indeed, it can indeed be a problem. The lack of it is called ignorance, and that's a problem. A big problem. Willful ignorance is actually an even bigger problem, that considerable problem. And the lack of knowledge is a problem with knowledge itself. Philosophers call the theory of knowledge epistemology, as if they got pissed and they're like, oh, I seem to know so much more that I didn't know when I was sober. Everything feels so much less scary. I must have pissed him off a lot of bit, or something like that, and they try to say, they have a laugh, and they go, oh, I know what it is, it's epistemology. We're talking about getting pissed and knowing shit you didn't know before. Perhaps. How does knowledge arrive? Where is knowledge kept? Consider. There is a saying given to some: test everything, hold on to what is good. Now this, until very, very recently, was the way that science proceeded in the Western world, where scientists would test everything. Very obediently to that word, I'd say. And they would test everything repeatedly. That was one of the core tenets of the scientific method, as I understand it, was explaining what you did, whether it be done to a plant or sap or dirt or gases or animals or men. Explain what you did, please. And the idea behind that is so that other scientists can replicate what you did. They can say, well, I'm not saying I don't believe what you wrote there in that published article about that monkey that you stabbed a spike into his head so that you could push him around a bit more easier, when you were shocking his feet with electricity and flashing his eyes with strobe lights and blasting his ears with 100 decibel music. Anthony, I'm not saying I don't believe you did that. But what I'm saying is explain it clearly what you did so that someone else can replicate it to arrive at your same findings, if they dared to. I'm not saying any other man is as foolish as Anthony Fauci, for practicing on primates, those sorts of things. Check it out on peta.org. That was a few years ago. He stopped denying that one, and the article is published, I believe, on Nature, the journal. And that's one of the big ideas of science, and how come we've progressed so far with our techne, as they say in the ancient Greek, from which we get the word technology. One of the outcomes of scientific process, even though I consider language to be techne, a tool to be used. But language might not only be used as techne. Aristotle said another word, poesis, and he held them in a sort of tension, and he said they are different from each other, and from poesis we get the word poetry. And indeed, Albert Camus, in the 1950s, is an existentialist who also wrote plays, and there's a lot to say about that we won't get into today, because today we're talking about knowledge. And what Albert Camus said was that at the core of science, the physical sciences, the chemical sciences, the biological sciences, is a poetic metaphor, that of an atom being composed of a nucleus with electrons spinning around it in orbit. And indeed the periodic table was constructed on that basis. Numbers granted to substances by men, like men grant numbers to men and say, this man, because of these numbers in this software, in this bank, this man might indeed purchase something from me, a boat, a house, some food. And they say they think they know us by the numbers. But that's not possible, for a man is not a number, in fact. God is one. God is one what? Do you know? Is God is one orangutan? Is God is one monkey? Is God is one primate? Like Anthony Fauci is practicing his torments upon primates to discover ways to physiologically induce depression in primates. Very similar to the sorts of torture that were practiced recently in Guantanamo Bay through sleep deprivation and waterboarding. And what does the torturer seek to extract from them that they torture? But knowledge, is it not? How can you trust the word out of a man whom you are coercing to speak? Knowledge, philosophers have said, is justified true belief. I don't know if I accept that, but it's reasonable to suggest it in any case. We're not talking about belief. We probably will next, perhaps. But today we're talking about knowledge, and this one might be short because I'm very fond of saying that I know so very little. I don't even know what knowledge is, nor how I access it, nor how it is taken from them with dementia, or Alzheimer's, or amnesia, or a somnambulist, a sleepwalker, as he walks through the night, not knowing what he is doing, a madman as he acts frightfully on the street, potentially not knowing what he is doing, a ranting politician with saliva spewing from his vocal cavity as he rants and raves and conflates one thing with another, even saying to be opposed to a vaccine is to be opposed to compulsory behaviors, or vice versa. I mean, when you equate one thing with another, it works both ways, I suppose you know that. I believe it to be true, and so I inferred that because I have that justified true belief, that you might indeed share that too. When you say 1 equals 1, then both them numbers on each side of that equal sign are granted the same value. Knowledge, eh? Another word for knowledge is gnosis, spelt just like that sounded, but I think it's pronounced gnosis. And there are a group of people, a sect from long ago, dear to the followers of the way, that practice Gnosticism, not agnosticism. The ag is like a dis. It says, I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to consider that. And that's all I ask of anyone, is just to consider whatever that is. Whether it be a man or a fish or a lizard or a cloud or a dream or a hatred. Just consider it. Gnosis is important. It comes as it will. How was one to expect that which one did not know? It's often called an epiphany or a eureka moment, where one stumbles upon something they did not ken before. Knowledge, eh? I had something there that I wanted to say, actually. It wasn't Hallelujah sure at that point, but That's always a good thing to say, a bit of words that you make up from time to time. I learnt a bit about Manchuria today. They all, until the 1900s at least, well, I don't know, it's the Qing dynasty and all that, but I did learn something about them today. Their surnames are all made up of 4 words. I believe each word is represented by a single pictogram in that particular language, but Manchurian is not Mandarin. The Manchurians have a surname made up of 4 words. They have a first or given name made up of 2 words and a middle name given to them as well, made up of another 2 words. It's a very structured way to name a human being, right? Much different than I've heard of other people naming human beings. Looking at what happens outside the tent when the day comes that the child is born, and seeing a cloud or an elk or a rose-coloured sky. That's another way to name a child. And Yeshua is the name of a child, you know. Yeshua. Sounds beautiful to me in English. Yes, you are. Yes, you are my child, the father might have said. Yes, you are. A shibboleth. I know that a shibboleth is a test to distinguish one thing from another. It rides upon the way that the S is pronounced, or the sh is pronounced. Some people get it, some people don't like jokes, you know. And indeed, getting a joke is like a sudden glory, I've read. Suddenly stumbling into something that which you did not know before. A little like an epiphany, a little like a eureka moment. And I know that in Australia we have a history, and it's not all good, you know. It's actually very fucking bad. Because it's not only convicts that were sent here, but it's also the jailers of convicts that were sent here. And those jailers behaved abominably to the men and the women and the children which they abducted from the motherland of Australia, I suspect I can say. They sailed on ships, the first fleet. But in actual fact, the first fleet-footed people that got here arrived millenniums before that. The proper word is millennia. But actually I hate Latin more than any other language. In fact, I can't think of another language I hate. But I hate Latin because much evil has been done by that bloody sorcerous language. And I know that, though many might actually disagree. I don't mind that they disagree. I don't need to convince them of what I know. That would be foolish in a war like this one, actually. But in a war like this one, the enemy is sort of confounded. And he's sort of confounded because he conflates things like being anti-vaccination as being the same thing as being anti-mandate. I can actually say, as a man sworn to uphold the nations and peoples of this land, that I can be anti-civil conscription for medical procedures, because that's what the fucked out the Constitution says, actually, since about 1946 in section, I think it's 5123A. A for Alpha, O for Omega, the beginning and the end. We're here in the beginning of the end. I know that. The end of what? Who gives a fuck, really? Anyway, knowledge. It's good to get it. It's actually something better to get than knowledge, and something that's worth getting with all of your getting, which is understanding. That's a wonderful thing to hold on to. And for understanding, we actually need to talk about meaning and sense. Not just the sense of a word, but also the sense of our perceptions, the sense of the things which we encounter, whether they be beasts or men or ideas. We need to have our senses about us, actually. All of us. But I heard a South African police officer in the Northern Territory tell a young woman recently, whilst she was detained without charge, without a lawyer, without a day in court, without a criminal record, without a warrant, without due process of law, she was detained as a kidnapper might detain someone, unlawfully. And this South African police officer employed in the Northern Territory, he told her, it doesn't have to make sense, it's just how it is. And so I know him as my enemy, and I know he speaks for my enemy. For my enemy is one as God is one, for actually, I'm pretty sure men like that premier in the Northern Territory, I don't know if they call them premiers of territories anyway, but in any case, that gunner fella, gonna do this, gonna do that, gonna have a lockdown that lasts forever, locking people away in a quarantine camp or an internment camp or a detention center or a concentration camp or whatever language they try to use to hide what they are actually doing. And they are probably hiding it from themselves as much as from anyone, you know. And that police officer spoke on behalf of the government which he serves. And I can attest that that leader of that government would be happy with the way that police officer spoke to that young woman which he had kidnapped and was detaining without charge. And I know he spoke his truth, because I'm a postmodernist like Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate, the first postmodernist philosopher who said, indeed, to a man who claimed to be the very truth, what is truth? And what a question is that to ask, actually, to one considered to be wisdom itself. So I love Pontius Pilate, much as I love me, actually. And indeed, I've seen a beautiful artwork of that chap. I even copied it out in an art school. It's by Piero della Francesca, an Italian painting in the Renaissance, and it's beautiful. There are many beautiful things here. And perhaps we'll have an episode about beauty and the problem with that. Because I'm pretty fucking sure there's a problem with everything. Thank you for listening. We don't always have to push boundaries, you know. We ebb and we flow. We spin and we dance. Do you know how to dance? How do you know that? Either whether you do or whether you don't. No, I don't know how to dance. How do you know that unless you've tried? And if you try, what carries you away into a dance? And then can you say, I know how to dance, or I know that I can dance, or I know that I have danced before? I remember dancing. How does memory relate to knowledge? If I have learned a language such as Japanese, ichi ni san shigo, and so on. What if I forget roku and I skip straight to Jew, or whatever it is? A homonym, I suspect, actually. I think it means 10 as well as a people group that has previously gone through what we are currently going through. And they showed us how it can be resisted, how it can be submitted to, how it can be endured, right? How it can be sung and danced through, how it can be played, because indeed our enemy lacks sense. To the enemy, things do not need to make sense. To us, I believe we have a need. Perhaps many. Like Johnny Cash would say, there's one need in the night. And I don't know if it's night today. But, well, I think there's more than one need at the minute. So it must be day indeed. For if it was night, there would only be one need. But I'm asserting that there is more than one need. And one of our needs, my people, the people I belong with, as a Darug man, though I've not spoken personally to a Darug yet, I just like to be accepted by them, I guess. But my needs include needing things to make sense. And so I'll strive to ensure that they do, to me in my own way, which may indeed be different to you in your own way. And indeed, the sense that you have made of things and the sense that I have made of things might well combine into a greater sense of something between us. You know, I sort of believe that. I'm just sort of speculating at the minute, though. I love to talk. I love to sing. I love to dance. I know I love these things. How do I know I love these things? Whether the thing be an activity, or a human being, or an animal, or even money. It's possible. I am assured it's possible for a man to fall in love with money. I don't understand it. It seems too risky to me. Money being a root of all evil, with me as the root of all evil. Or so I believe. In any case, I love myself, obviously. I do indeed. Indeed I do. Amen. And I try my best to love my neighbour. I do. I run outdoors as soon as I find an opportunity for a bit of humour to share with a neighbour, like I did yesterday. And I won't repeat the joke because it went well, but it was sudden and suddenly ended. I love my enemy. Why on earth would the Son of the living God say, love your enemies? As Gandhi said, if you take the Moses option of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you might actually end up going blind and toothless, as some men do. And I know I've met one toothless man when I worked in a cafe down in Glebe 15 years ago, I guess, maybe 20. And he had no teeth. And he offered to suck my privates, I guess. And he was frail and seated, and I was busy as a waiter, so it's not a problem. I wasn't threatened by it. I was actually thrilled at the offer. Very tempting. But I didn't really want to risk it. The riskiest situation that I was in, actually, was after dancing at the Hellfire Club around those times as well. And on one occasion there, as I was dancing on a podium with glow sticks, I think I was using at the time, not LED finger lights like I like to use sometimes, but glow sticks, dancing my ass off, best I can. I've broken a pair of shoes apart, new shoes on the same day I bought them. I danced them into pieces. They were Royal Elastics, I don't know if they're still made, but in any case, not made well enough to sustain my dancing feet. Which actually don't need shoes. And the shoes of the Darug are foul shoes, you know, because the Darug do not need shoes either, but it was missionaries that put shoes on the feet of those children. And I am hating those missionaries, you know. I know that. For they take the name of the Lord in vain. They call themselves Christians after Christ. I know that's taking his name, actually. And he is the Lord. Jesus is Lord. Right? He is coming, I know that. I don't know if you know that. I don't need you to know or accept that. I just would like you to know something and make sense of something. And just, you know, be saved by grace as we all are, regardless of what we know. I know for certain that Jesus is not one to condemn someone for being ignorant, in fact. Because he said, when he was on the tree, nailed there like a criminal in those days, he said, forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do. And I'm like, well, it's not a fucking excuse, actually, cunt. But, well, sorry for swearing. And don't say that if you're a child listening. It's actually, it means heart. In the army they say, get some about you. Get some of that C word about you. That's what they said it to me when I was a child. I joined when I was 17. My bombardier Mayfield said, get some cunt about you. And it actually means heart. If you look into your feminist literature, that's what it means. It's not a filthy word by any means. And in my car, driving my wife yesterday, we discussed love and disgust, and the way that disgust might grow in a man typically, and that erodes the love. And I've yet to consider more of that, but that's an interesting thing to consider, I dare say. But we're talking about knowledge today, and there was a train of thought which was sort of been on a tangent from actually. I know that men can love money. I know that I love my dog. I know that I love my weeds. A very big one over here that grew as big as a tree before I decided to saw it down. It's got very spiky seeds on it. You can see it, actually, I'll show you it. If you can see that thing, it's obviously not planted in the ground, and you can see over here, when I try not to step on the dog poo, you can see how thick that trunk is, and you can see the base of it sawn through. I hope you see that. I didn't see what was on the camera then, so anyway, I love my weeds. Here's another one, the child of that weed. I consider Anthony Fauci to be one of my weeds, actually, to be honest. And I love him as I love my enemies. So why would the Son of the Living God say, love your enemies? An enemy implies a conflict, perhaps a war. And in a war, knowledge is very important. You can take my word on that, or you can imagine what it would be like to be ignorant of an ambush whilst you're marching to your target. That ignorance would be very costly to those people in that outfit. What about lacking the knowledge about how to load the weapons in your unit? What if one of your comrades is killed and he was the one shooting or responsible for shooting the Carl Gustav 84mm, and suddenly a tank came and all you had was your Steyr rifle and your dead mate's rocket launcher or bazooka or whatever you call it. Anyway, it is a Carl Gustav, and it is 84mm as a projectile in diameter, not in length, and it does blow up hills at least, and I assume it could probably blow up a tank. And what if your body had been shot by an infantryman from the enemy, and you did not know how to load that and how to shoot it single-handedly without your buddy to hold on to your waist as you did it, which is the way I was taught to fire that. But I believe I have seen people these days shooting them single-handedly, knelt down. What if you didn't know how to load it and the tank came? Would the tank butt roll over you, crushing your spine, crushing your skull, crushing your organs? And then what? Would you finally know what it is to die? Does a dead man know anything? Do we get to say what a dead man knows? Do we get to say what another human being knows? I doubt it. I barely even know how to say what I know. Right? One of the problems with knowledge, not only the lack of it, but a more pernicious one is what my enemies face, is thinking they know something when they don't. And here I'd like us to consider the relationship between sense and knowledge. You can sense something is true if you test it. You can validate that test by getting other people to test it as well, and you can come to agreement with people that speak reasonably. And then that agreement is called consensus. And on that consensus we might promote knowledge, and science is but a word for knowledge, not different than that. And by breaking that intersubjective process of rational, reasonable human conversation about those things which we have tested, those things which we have had a hunch about and then tested, breaking that process by redacting studies, right, not publishing your research, breaks that scientific process, in fact. And it is my enemies that are doing that. They are redacting their studies. So the pharmacological companies, and again I remind you, pharmaca in the ancient Greek means witchcraft. I know that. I learned it in fiction, actually. An interesting thing to consider as well, but maybe not today, but perhaps today. But those pharmacological companies, or those pharmaceutical companies, it comes from the same root word, witchcraft, and they are rich. They make billions out of us. And yet, one of those companies, I believe, published some trials, clinical trials about drugs that they are currently trying to enforce on people in the Northern Territory here. And those so-called studies they published, they redacted a lot of the information from them, so they can't actually be confirmed in an unbiased and impartial manner. So they lose out actually on the perspective of the other, right? They have their own selfish perspective, driven by their lusts, and a driven enemy is actually a wonderful thing. An obsessed enemy is a